Chapter 25. I skipped school today, Maggie said. I went out the front door, and then, when my aunts went into the parlor, I sneaked back in the back door and I came up here. She looked at Timothy John and Miss Christabel and waited for their responses. Then you'll have to learn some lessons from us, Miss Christabel said. Timothy John, what lessons do we know? Timothy John thought a while. Lessons, he said. We used to know lessons, didn't we, Miss Christabel? I can't seem to remember them, though. And he consulted his scrap of newspaper. How about wash tubs? He asked after a while. Wash tubs aren't a proper school subject, Miss Christabel said. She should be taught Latin or botany. Ah, yes, Latin, Timothy John answered, or botany. Which one is botany, animals or rocks? It's plants, Maggie told him. It's flowers, Miss Christabel said. Flowers, Timothy John explained. Let's do that. He picked up Juniper in his basket and led the way to the garden. Now, he said, when they had all arranged themselves in front of the roses on the wallpaper, we will start with the blossom. Who knows what the blossom is? Juniper, do you? But Juniper only growled in his basket. Maggie? Maggie tried to remember what she had learned in science once about blossoms. Nothing about sepals and stamens and pistons. No, that was cars. Pistils. No, something like that. It's the flower part with the petals, so you can tell if it's a rose. And it's where the plants reproduce, she added, remembering something else. I don't think that's right, Miss Christabel said, and she bent her head close to a single rose on the wall. It looks to me like a dancer in a gypsy costume, she said. Don't you think so, Timothy John? Look, these are her scarves, crimson silk scarves. See how they float in the wind when she spins? I think the blossom must be a gypsy dancer. Timothy John bent over and examined the flower with her. Yes, and this bud is the gypsy baby. See? It's all swaddled in scraps and tatters. At any moment now, it will kick its way out. Put your ear to the vine, Maggie, and see if you can hear it cry. Maggie did as she was told, half expecting to hear a tiny whimper from the flowered paper. But there was no sound, and she pulled away. I can't hear anything, she said. Then it must be asleep, Timothy John answered. What about the leaves? Who knows what leaves are? Maggie? Maggie looked at the green leaves twining up and down the trellis in their steady rhythm. Leaves, big rose, leaves, small rose, leaves, big rose, leaves, small rose. I don't know, she said. They store food or something. No, that wasn't right. What did leaves do? Miss Christabel put her face up against the wall. They're castanets, she said. They're the gypsies' castanets. Wait for the wind to blow, then you'll hear them shake. There they go. Listen, Maggie. Maggie closed her eyes and imagined a faint clatter of slim wooden scoops shaking at her ear, but she tossed her head quickly and stared again at the design on the wallpaper. What kind of lesson was this anyway? There now, Timothy John declared. We have learned all about flowers today. You left out the thorns, Miss Christabel reminded him. The thorns, Timothy John exclaimed, and he let his hand dart from spot to spot on the wallpaper. Sharp, 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 and he pulled his arm back rapidly. Maggie, tell everybody what thorns are. What were thorns? Those hidden arrows that made tiny beads of blood spring out of your fingertips? I don't know, she said. But you must know, Timothy John insisted. Look at them again. What do they make you think of? Maggie leaned down to look at the thorns on the wall. What did they make her think of? The little black barbs on the paper were blunt and harmless, faded speckles among leaves and buds. Suddenly she had a thought. They're hooks, she said, for catching the gypsies' scarves on so they won't blow away. Miss Christabel and Timothy John both stopped still. That's wonderful, Timothy John exclaimed. What a wonderful answer. Hooks to catch scarves on. Miss Christabel, isn't that wonderful? Maggie taught something to us today. Maggie, that was truly wonderful. Maggie thought about what she had said. It was nice, like a poem, and she smiled a little. There were shimmering ribbons of rain at the window, and only the palest of light settled on the little table. The two dolls held their hands above the kettle, for warmth, they said, and their fingers now and then caught the faint glow of its copper dome. Maggie drew closer. It did seem warmer at the table, and looked across at the two doll faces, glowing too in the copper shine. And she put her hand out to them for a quick moment. Please, she whispered. Let me live here with you all the time. We could have lessons and I could make your tea and water the roses. You could be my teachers and I could be your caretaker or something. We could belong to each other. But then you wouldn't be our visitor, Miss Christabel objected. I could be your all-the-time visitor, Maggie suggested. That's not a visitor, Miss Christabel answered. That's a member of the household. I could be that then. I could be the member of the household that takes care of you and fixes you when you break. That makes no sense at all, Timothy John said. Who would come to visit? But you didn't always have a visitor, Maggie said. What did you do? What did you used to do before I came? Waited, said Miss Christabel. Waited for what? For our visitor. Maggie looked at them both. For me, you mean. All you did was wait for me. But for how long? Until you came, Timothy John replied. No, I mean, how long have you been here? When did you first come? When did you first start waiting? When did we first come? Timothy John repeated, and he lifted his newspaper scrap to his face and studied it a long time. Wednesday, he finally said. No, how many years ago? How many years ago it was Wednesday? Timothy John asked Miss Christabel. A good many, she replied. A good many, he told Maggie. Although there were many that were not good at all. Maggie looked at the newspaper. That's when you first came here, she said. When that newspaper is from, 18-something? But that's maybe 100 years ago. You've been here 100 years? 100 years. How many girls could have lived in the school downstairs at that time? 100, 200, 1,000? All those girls, all those years, and not one knew that no more than a few dozen yards away, a tiny household bustled, drank tea, watered roses, read, spoke, swept, petted a growling dog, listened maybe. Maybe I could be both, Maggie said suddenly. Maybe I could be a member of the household and the visitor. Then you would be visiting yourself, Timothy John objected, and that would make no sense. You are the visitor. We are the members of the household. One visitor, 2 members of the household, until the other one comes, and then we will be 3. Maggie put her teacup down. What other one? What do you mean? Who else is coming here? There is one more of us to come, Miss Christabel said, holding the teapot over her cup. And then we will be quite complete. Who? Maggie demanded. Who's coming? You mean another doll? Another doll? But we have no dolls as it is. I mean, will it be as big as you or as big as me? Neither, Timothy John answered. It will be exactly as big as itself, from its feet to its head, not 1 inch bigger. But how big? Maggie persisted. Will it fit on one of these chairs? Sit, Timothy John corrected. Not fit. One sits on a chair. Will it sit on one of these chairs then, will it? Of course it will sit on one, Miss Christabel said. There's no need to sit on 2. It was a doll then, but when was it going to come? When? Miss Christabel carried the sugar spoon back and forth between the little bowl and her cup. When it is time. Come, finish your tea. Look, Timothy John, the vapors have begun to curl her hair, just as we said they would. That's quite right, Timothy John agreed. You have changed, Maggie. Me? Maggie looked down at her feet. How have I changed? The roses have changed you, Miss Christabel said. Their glow has come off on your face, as we said, and the bread has flattened your wrists. Look in the mirror, Timothy John said, and see for yourself. The mirror hung like a picture above her bedroom sink, holding within its frames a piece of gray sky and a rain dark branch and an expanse of plaster wall. Maggie put herself in the scene. It was true. Her face was fuller. The shadow that used to fall just below her cheekbone was gone, and her chin had lost its sharp point. Her hair, too, no longer lay like wet weeds against her neck, but fluffed out around her ears. Was it really because of the roses and the wooden slabs of bread and the empty cups of tea? She seized her breath and tilting her head side to the side so that her hair fell on one shoulder, began striking at it with the sharp bristles until it floated like a chiffon scarf around her face. Nice. She looked nice in the mirror. She had hardly looked in the mirror since she had shown off its powers to the Backwoods girls. The Backwoods girls. How long had it been since she had last called them to her and guided them through the many wonders of her room? It was hard to remember. A month, maybe. 2. She looked now at these same wonders, the pen on the desk, the playing cards. When had she last played solitaire? The chest of drawers, and she felt no urge to show them off to anyone. Maggie, it was Aunt Lillian. Maggie watched the color drain from her face in the mirror as she remembered suddenly that she had skipped school that day and had forgotten to come back through the front door at 3 o'clock. Maggie! Aunt Lillian's voice came from the garden, and Maggie went to the window. It was still raining, and 2 black umbrellas, like a pair of giant toadstools, suddenly sprung from the earth, moved to the birch trees, to the rose beds, back to the birches. Maggie! The aunts called. First one, then the other. Maggie! She retreated from the window and stood against the wall. Presently, a door slammed, and Aunt Lillian called from somewhere below. Maggie! She stepped quietly into the corridor. She's never skipped school before, she heard. Maybe she's run away. Children don't run away from homes where they are properly nourished. Then where can she have gone? To see a friend. She has no friend. There was a long silence. Then she was just beginning to improve. She stopped sucking her hair. Have you noticed that? It's her nutrition. Children with adequate nutrition have no need to suck their hair. And her face, it's beginning to fill out. It was true then. Even her aunts had noticed. Maybe something happened on the way to school. Not likely. She would have been seen. There was a new tone in their voices now. Worry. They were worried about her. They noticed that her face looked fuller and her hair wasn't wet anymore. And they were worried that something had happened to her, that she had been hurt, killed even. Maybe they thought she had been struck by a car or something. Maggie! The voices were closer now. Maggie! What? She answered from the upstairs hall. In a moment, both aunts were at the bottom of the stairs. How did you get up there? One cried, and then the other. Where have you been? She walked down one step at a time while the 2 aunts called out repeatedly, Where were you? From below. It didn't matter what they said. They were relieved to see her. Her face was fuller, and they were happy that she hadn't been killed. Into the parlor, Aunt Harriet commanded when she reached the bottom step. Both aunts seated themselves side by side on the sofa before they uttered another word, their gray hairs and gray clothes fading into the gray of the cushions. Sit down, Aunt Lillian ordered. Why weren't you in school today? Aunt Harriet demanded. How did they know, come to think of it, that she had skipped school? I got sick, she answered. Sick? The nurse didn't say you were sick. She said you hadn't been to school at all. That was how, the nurse. I got sick on the way and I came back. And I didn't want to bother you, so I stayed outside in the fresh air. That was good. They liked fresh air. Anyway, it didn't matter what she said. They were glad she was alive. It's been raining all day, Aunt Lillian said. That was true. Little moist points were attacking the parlor windows even now. Why had she said that? You're keeping something from us. You are a sneak. You are a truant. You were hiding somewhere. Where do you hide? What do you do? Where do you go? Maggie allowed her eyes to travel around the room like a slow train on a track, stopping here, starting up, stopping there. The man in the portrait gazed at her steadily from under his reddish hair. The woman next to the frame wore a handkerchief tucked into her sleeve. Did everybody do that in those days? A gray curtain, like an oblong of rain itself, hung at each rainy window. The ivory elephants marched in their silent parade, little ones first, big ones at the end, on the top shelf of the curio cabinet. The china ballerina balanced on the tip of her shiny toe. Where did you go? What did you do? Answer. But Maggie didn't answer. Something had caught her eye. How was it she had never noticed it before? She inched her chair sideways across the rug to get a better view and lowered her head to her shoulder. Sit up straight or you will damage your spine. Behind the curio cabinet, at eye level, a slender clasp had been driven into the wall, and from it, like a mouse in the grip of a claw, hung a small black key.